you. That's all the people that don't want to run for president. I'd just like to welcome you on a sloppy Sunday to our first History Speaks of the season. We will be having another one on May 4th. So stay tuned. And I'd also like to acknowledge at this point that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Wolastoqey people who signed treaties of peace and friendship with the British Crown in the 1700s. And some of our folks go back almost that far as newcomers here. And just a quick aside, we are currently in the process of editing our book called Century Homes of Keswick Ridge. And we extended a special invitation to folks who might either be connected with one or living in one. And if you wouldn't mind, put your hand up if you're in a century home or, okay, we've got one hand. Super. So special welcome to you folks. And afterwards, if you wouldn't mind stopping back here at the credenza in the back, I've got some reproductions of the pages in the current edition. And we want to make sure that the information we already have is correct. And if you have something to add to it, we'd appreciate that too. So our special guest today is John Leroux, and people say he needs no introduction, but I will do this little thing and let you know that in case you didn't. John's an architect, he's an art historian, he's a writer, photographer, and a teacher, and other things besides. He's currently the manager of collections and exhibitions at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery. And he spoke to us about the architecture of Keswick Ridge a couple of years ago in this series. And since then, I have to say, I want to say congratulations. He's been named to the Order of New Brunswick.
Bow before me.
Well, he's a real champion of the province in all sorts of ways, and always inspiring when he talks. So we look forward to hearing him revisit the architecture of Keswick Ridge this afternoon. So, John?
That's great, thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. It's great to be back here. I know Russ asked me, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago to do it again, and I think I'm not sure if it's just because you forgot to record the last one. Get a second chance at that. No, I know those things happen, but there's been there's so much in my life that I care deeply about, and I think top of that is speaking to groups like yourself and people that I certainly know and care about things that really matter. And the architecture of Keswick Ridge and Mactaquac in this area is really top amongst them. In fact, I think when you asked me, I was really busy, and I said actually probably with no hyperbole, it's like, well, I can't say no to Keswick Ridge, so I got to do it. So well, listen, anyway, thanks so much, and I'm glad a lot of people are returning home. I've been Nancy from down south, so it's great to have such good friends here. So start up on it. I'm going to share the screen now, I believe. There we go. Share. Okay. Revisiting the architecture of Keswick Ridge. And let's see, is it all? Let's see, I'm going to move this thing up there. Okay, great. Move that down. There's a lot of layers of technology going on here. Okay, great. All right. So when Russ asked me to come back, I remember actually, I think you asked her, maybe even it was a year ago if I would do it or something. He said, well, sure. And you said, well, just give the same one, because I remember that you did say that. And I said, well, I don't want to talk about the same thing because it's, it was riveting and excellent. But, there's certainly some things that I didn't bring up, and some other things, the sensibilities constantly change. And one of the things that was a catalyst for this was, and I absolutely, my own treasured copy of Century Homes of Keswick Ridge, wonderful. Russ told me that you're revisiting it and doing a new revitalized version of it. And one of the things that we actually spoke about briefly was that I'm going to admit someone on there. Okay. This is just an opinion. We can talk a bit more about it after if you want in a Q&A. But my own opinion is that one of the reasons that I'm doing this is because the architecture of this community is outstanding for a relatively small New Brunswick community. there are some extremely important and remarkable buildings here. And many of those are actually beyond the houses. The houses are fantastic. They mean a lot. But I think a lot of what I'm going to be showing you here today are beyond just the century homes. We're going to talk about more. And so if there's one thing I could say, I'm just going to throw it out as a little thought, and you don't have to do it because John Leroux said anything, but I think it's worth, I think it can make it bigger, is that I would actually consider, if you do this, have it the architecture of Keswick Ridge and Mactaquac, because it's more than the century homes. It doesn't negate this, but I think the things that have an equal gravitas, which some of which you'll see here, are beyond just the houses. But we can talk about that after. Revisiting the architecture of Keswick Ridge, and of course being Mactaquac as well. Here we go. There we go. So this wonderful book that was done 20 years ago, concentrating on this incredible farming community and some of the most, oh yeah, come on in.
I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I had to start without you, so just a minute ago. So one of the things is you have some wonderful residential buildings here, of which I keep coming back. And one of the things about these as well is that things are rooted oftentimes in buildings that are elsewhere. And one of the things I find most interesting about speaking about architecture is where those lineages, where those connections are. So oftentimes, and I know in the book that you have here, it deals quite deeply with the people that built them, when the land grants were so on, and the story individually, the micro story, which are fascinating. The houses like the Coburns. I mean, geez, I had a great day with Dave Coburn a couple of weeks ago, going through this riveting story of the buildings. And those are outstanding, extremely important. But what also is equally important is those connections to buildings where the roots are, that are even outside of Canada, or sometimes internationally, which can really add a lot of weight to this. To say here in tiny little Keswick Ridge, in New York County, that there are some things that connect us with Europe, with the United States, with Great Britain, really, really distinctly. So a few slides you may recognize from last one. The Moses Pickard House, which my friend Stuart Smith lived in for many years and restored, is one-to-one with buildings built in the 1600s in the United States. And when the Loyalists came, and this is typical of almost all refugees when they come, they talk of Italian Americans that came to the States in 1905. Oftentimes, it's just this sort of social thing. Your culture would kind of stay relatively frozen for a long time, as it would sort of change in the old country. But here it sort of stays. You keep what you had left behind, and it doesn't alter as much. So with the Loyalists in 1813, we're still building the same way they were 150 years before, because that's what they knew, and it was passed on. And that idea of kind of real evolution would only really start to come in the later 19th century. So it's amazing that you walk in the Moses Pickard House, and I've been in it about 15 years, but I assume it's still the same. It's like walking into something from the 17th century in New England. And then you get the 5 Bay Georgian, like the Samuel Smith House, which most people don't see on Crocs Point Road. It's got the vinyl windows and some Rusco windows, or vinyl siding, Rusco windows, but it's still in remarkable condition, that its overall form is exactly the way it was built. Guess what? 200 years ago. You have a 200 great, wonderful Georgian Bay house. And then you get the Samuel Pickard House here, just up the Ridge Road, which is a wonderful example. You get this sort of rural sort of farmhouse. But if you look at the front here as well, you have a classical Greek facade. So the original builders that 200 years ago, they chose to build out of wood, basically a temple front to connect them with these classical ideals, which are coming in the early 19th century. And this is, and luckily it hasn't been removed. A lot of older homes, they would have taken that out to run siding over. But it really is elegant. The proportions, this sort of symmetry are all about sort of Greek and classical ideals that came out of the Enlightenment, and even with the Renaissance. You have this house right on the corner of Keswick Ridge that connect with these really deep philosophical ideas about democracy, about higher ideals, about education, about self-improvement and things like that. And this is a wonderful example of it. And if you go into Fredericton, these are also relatively rare. In Fredericton, there's a few great examples of some you may know. Classical front, Regent Street 203, which is right opposite your old FHS or George Street. And you can see the sort of Doric columns, but it's exactly the same sensibilities as the Pickard House. Or even on, we call the old education building next to the legislature downtown. You know, a central multiple bay building built first in 1816, and then it wouldn't have had it then, but in the 1860s, when the Greek revival became popular and they built the second story, they would have slapped on this wooden classical front. So those exact same sensibilities for these buildings are happening here in Keswick Ridge. One building I did talk about last time, which is the Anglican Church Rectory, just on McKean Drive. Wonderful, wonderful house. It looks fantastic in the snow. I mean, red, you know, it was like very, very Canadian. So I took a photo of that a couple of weeks ago. And one of the interesting things about this house is they say pre-1860, based again on the book here. It's probably much older than that. I would say it's probably early 1800s. And one of the interesting things about, you can see it has the gable in the front, you know, the angled gable. 99%, almost 100%, that is not original, in the idea that it would have been built in probably the 1870s during the Gothic revival period. Originally, this house would have been a straight 5-bay house like this, which is an example in St. Andrews, Cape Cod house, because they wouldn't have built Cape Cods originally with the angled gables. Those came in the Gothic revival. And you think of the Gothic revival, like Christchurch Cathedral or so on, these sort of great vertical buildings with the Gothic arch, you know, these things all pointed heavenward. During the early 1800s, no one built gable dormers like that. Didn't exist. It's the Gothic, this whole idea of the pointed, the looking heavenward and skyward, really expressed in this sort of domestic way. So almost guaranteed that this would have been a straightforward 5-bay house, and probably in the 1870s that was added. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if you went and did some dendrochronology of the wood. This is probably, I'm guessing like 1810, 1820s. So the house is much older. So another one, the old McCullough house in the 1850s, my friend Jen and Jerry live in, with its little addition, done again in the 1850s. But what's remarkable about Keswick Ridge is you have so many of these houses here from the 1850s, and that are already, you know, 175 years old. And this one, when you walk in, I don't know if anyone's been inside the house, but the original beams are there, hand hewn, and the character is definitely still there. And the outside, they've added this modern piece onto the side, which is really kind of in character of keeping with the house. But one of the interesting things about this as well, and I didn't see it in this, is someone who lived in there in the 1970s is the glass artist Marty Domain lived in there. You know, that's a pretty important part of its history, right? You get a nationally recognized glass artist who, believe it or not, now is teaching and working at MIT in Boston, you know? And so at the time when he came with Opus, which we're going to talk about in a bit, he was one of the only glass artists working with sort of heated glass of his type in Canada. So quite a renowned person to live in there. So as I said, don't just focus on the original people. It's the lineage of who's kind of gone on, you know, sort of past. As I say, as you know, it is Jen and Jerry's place, you know, great important academic and wonderful New Brunswick artist as well, right? This was great too. I learned about, you know, my visit to Coburn's, the Tyler Coburn houses. Again, what do you see in the front? You see the gable dormer. Now, what's just interesting about this one quite probably was built at the same time, because by the 1860s, they were doing gable dormers. That was the style of the day, and it's just a different form of the house. And what's great is visiting the Coburn Museum, I got to see, they had this great picture of Tyler Coburn. And there he is right there at the very left. And it's amazing. As who here's visited the Coburn Museum? Oh, God love you, Keswick Ridge. Anyway, an amazing collection of work, but just to see that was a real privilege. And I think to have the actual connection of the person that built that, connected with that great local family. And then again, the shoe, which you said that was found in the Tyler house, right? In the walls. Yeah, and you know, there's a whole tradition of putting shoes in walls for good luck. So very, very likely that shoe was put in by the original builders, because what else would a shoe get in the wall? Unless you're really drunk, you know, and all that. But I mean, and to say that is it's part of the architecture, but this sort of folkloric kind of thing that we do. And I think it's just an amazing piece. So the William Coburn house, I'll say this, one of the things that's interesting about this 1806, 1840s, 2001, it's been altered over time. But I got this photo from the museum of the original barn that was there, this wonderful sort of collection of buildings. And one of the things that's really interesting to think about, the older agricultural buildings with houses and barns here is the collection. And I've been accused often of speaking with sort of hyperbole in that, but this is almost like an acropolis of Keswick Ridge. You think of Athens, you get these houses and the temples and these buildings around, but how they relate to each other in this supposedly kind of random way, but they create this wonderful sort of sense of enclosures and courtyards and vistas and buildings. And even now that, it's altered quite significantly from this, but it's still there, and that the house has turned. But that again, that's all part of the history. And some of the outbuildings, and I'll be the when we walked around, the outbuildings to me are actually what fence the house, the equally fascinating and supremely interesting. So this one blew my mind. The barn. And so was it David's? What's what
Donald's barn.
Donald's barn? There you go, Donald's barn. And Donald was
He would have been a cousin of mine, but he's Tyler's grandson.
okay. So they called this Donald's barn, and that's actually what I pulled up, saw from the road, and the Coburns, after looking at me a little weird, I said, "Well, was it? Oh, come on in." And it was good. And they took me through the barn. This is a remarkable building. In agriculture, look at the front. The proportions of this, you think, from whether it's a mathematician or architectural designer, are beyond gorgeous. That facade is, in my opinion, is absolutely perfect. The relationship of threes, if you're getting spiritual, I'm not saying it would represent sort of the Trinity, but the fact of things within the gable, the way the large piece works in, it's so balanced, and it's so gorgeous, and it's so perfect. It looks like something you'd seen in Andrew Wyeth painting. But I also think of you think of something like this, and this is not even as a joke. The fact you get American Gothic, one of the quintessential American art pieces, is you see what's behind them is the sense of this agricultural farm building, but there's a sense of elegance that you see transcends the sort of simple farm life of those farmers. There's something beautiful and classical and perfect about it, and I see that's the same in this barn overlooking the valley. And I know it's used, and I know you care about it and you love it, but it's a workaday building, but it matters more than we recognize. And I think that's a window you're looking. I'm up actually quite high to get that shot. I remember I sort of danced up there, and it's you're looking straight through. So on the backside, yeah, that's when I knew I was exactly in the middle too. You line up the Mayans, but I mean this building should be in a book on the architecture of this place. Like I said, I'm going to show you some things that maybe you'd scan by, but it's remarkable. And you had this great of Fred. Was it Fred and Jack or Fred and Jock? Jack was the dog by the hay rake. This photograph was, you can see the barn with older barns that don't exist anymore near the hay rake. So again, that this building has been giving to the community for a century. And inside, this wonderful sort of heavy timber, hand hewn. And what's interesting is the pieces, you can tell they were salvaged from another older barn, which people then were smart. If you take down a barn or something burned, you'd reuse the wood. And the fact that it was hand hewn, like pre-sawmill, dates it from about 200 years ago. Because by the 1820s, you're starting to use them as sawmills. So the wood in that is 2 centuries old, sort of reused. Say, I feel bad. Don't worry about the cobwebs. It's not because they don't care about the building. They can't sweep it every day. But up in the rafters are 4 feet apart. And again, what you see is you have these wonderful spaces between the boards where you see the original wood shingles which are under there, which was a way of building, which they didn't sort of lap the siding as close. They would do that also to let the building breathe. So there's even building technology aspects in this, which are fascinating. But I mean, those rafters are this far apart, Old wood was strong. And this, the chicken, do you call it the chicken coop?
Yeah, that we call kid play-o.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, some call it the outhouse, some call it kids playhouse. Some call it that. But well, yeah, as you said, is made and again, the sort of off-center salt box roof. I said it's a remarkable building. But what's interesting too, when we went inside it, is it still has marked on some of this the egg. I got from 1948. That those little things which didn't matter, if you leave them long enough, they become treasures. Like your coffee crisp wrapper, toss it out, it's garbage. Well, in 100 years, you find that it's a historical treasure. So these notes are really, really precious of a social connection within this playhouse. So again, this building matters as much as the house.
Couldn't see brother fall through the roof. That was pretty cool.
Oh, so what was that?
Couldn't see my brother fall through the roof. But
Oh, did he? Yeah, yeah. Well, there's this, yeah, social history. That's right.
treasured memories.
It's all part of it. And then, of course, this. Here's some of the coolest architecture. I was driving by here one time. I did some Instagram photos of this last year, and I thought, my God, like that is the coolest thing ever on Fredericton. And again, God love the Coburn family for doing this, and then the people that are coming there. In fact, I know when you invited me, maybe sadly so, to your bonfire that's happening in the summer, I was talking to my friend Tim Ryder about this a few days ago. And he said, "Yeah, do you know about their party that they throw every summer?" He goes, "It's crazy." Yeah, what's going on? So anyway, I'm looking forward to this. But again, this is, yes, it's playful, it's sculptural, it's a temporary decorative thing, but it's not. This is architecture. And you've developed this sort of tradition, and it's gorgeous. Again, with the gable roof, you're building on this idea of a farm, of what the soul of a building means in a place that's been run for 200 years by a great family. Thinking about some other wonderful rural houses here that are really elegant beyond what we realize is the Long Duplessis house from Matchquack Heights. The trees were all cleared about it, but this is a wonderful collection of we call it big house, little house, back house, barn, where it was all connected. Because in the winter, you wouldn't want to go outside, but connected to the back barns. And anyway, it's outstanding. I still want to contact the owner to get inside and visit if I can, because it's a remarkable collection. Don't you just see that being a Tom Forrestal painting?
Yes.
Or wise like that? But even some of the materials in, an extreme amount of wealth would have been in this when it was built. Look at the back, these cut granite cornerstones of foundations. There's almost no foundation in York County made like this. There's none in Fredericton of this kind of stone. So, floating that up, that granite probably came from down around Gagetown, Spoon Island. Beautiful works. Again, Benjamin Coburn House, McKean Drive, you're getting away from more of the vernacular, and all of a sudden these sort of stylistic changes start to come. With the Queen Anne style, with different shingles. Look at the shingles on the side of that. Probably don't notice them as much because you don't stop and look and gawk, but you should, because right away you see 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of different siding on this within just about 12 feet. It's a remarkable house. It really is, and it speaks to an element of, yes, you're still a rural farming community, but there are elements of sort of stylistic advancement and decorative nature that this place, it really mattered. They'd also talk about some wealth. If you're poor and worried about where your next meal came from, you're not going to do decorative shingles in these patterns, but it meant a level of comfort, a level of establishment, and it spoke about the sophistication that was happening here. And All Saints Anglican Church as well, Edward Medley, who is the son of Bishop Medley that built the cathedral. The McKean's house there, sorry, in McKean's Corner is a beautiful church that tucked away. This would be far more well known in New Brunswick, but just in a way to its benefit is that it's away from the main road. It would have been the main road, of course, back in the day when a lot of river traffic was happening. But it's remarkable with where the structure of the bell coat actually runs right through in the middle of the building as you walk in. But the board and batten siding, it connects directly with some of the most important Anglican churches in New Brunswick by the same architect. Ones in St. Stephen, New Maryland, and Apahawkway that all still exist. And one of the great sort of things I was involved with was saving this. The Anglican diocese wanted to tear that down, and they came this close 10 years ago, and they invited me in, and I said, no, I think it's pretty important. And it created, since then, long story short, a Heritage Society in New Maryland, and they've restored it. And
That's right on the main drag.
That's right on the main drag. Yeah, and like I say, unlike Keswick Ridge, where you have 40 buildings of historic nature, New Maryland has maybe 2, and that's one of them. So the city couldn't lose it. But it's great, but it's 1-to-1 done by the same architect that designed yours. And again, connecting with these great buildings of the world. This was one thing I noticed, and trust me, after this, these are older slides I've shown you. New ones are quite different. This is the side and the entry, the sort of vestibule of the church. And notice this wonderful sort of Gothic, kind of a quatrefoil sort of pattern, and the sort of X forming right below out of wood connects it distinctly, and there's no question that Edward Medley knew about this, is to Wells Cathedral. The cross bracing, probably the most interesting decorative element of a Gothic church in the world is this. So it's this kind of lineage connected to to these great buildings. You know, I mean, I say I laugh like it's like, well, this is Britain, this is Keswick Ridge. You know, but it is. It doesn't matter. It's like say, hey, we're still connected to this, right? And of course, the building that we're in now, this wonderful Superior School, which was a school until when was the school until 60s?
1968.
1968. I just want to ask quickly, raise your hand if you're in any of these photos.
No,
No, but if we went here,
Yeah, oh yeah, who went to the school? And wow. Who used an outhouse with it? Wow. We're just talking about this. Okay. I saw Carolyn Holyoke. Do you know Carolyn Holyoke? That she was unfortunately she couldn't come today. I saw her a few hours ago and she said, I love this school. Yeah, I used to go to the outhouse all the time. She couldn't remember in the girls if there are multiple seats. I said there probably were. But this wonderful, wonderful school building. But again, look at the proportions at the side. I said this is less a classical building in a sense, but still just you know, you have the 6 windows in the back to the 4 on the front room, and then 5 in the front. So you have 4, 5, and 6. There's some really interesting things happening here. And just that beyond even as a museum of a connection, direct connection to history, there's a real elegance to this building, which is really remarkable. It's actually one of the nicest rural schools, wooden schools that I know of in the province. Now, of course, you got McKean's Corner Store right here, this beautiful restoration job you've done in Keswick Ridge Road. I'm going to start talking about a few of these buildings and connections with others in New Brunswick. You all know this building well, and it's been well loved and moved and saved, which is great. It's very similar to this. This is another example in Upper Woodstock, the old tavern and store, a little bit earlier, 1800. But what's interesting is that there you can see the old tavern a little bit before it was boarded up, and then of course McKean's in the top corner. The similar sensibilities, how you would kind of design a country store, central door, large windows on either side. So it's this kind of similar typology that are really rare. There's almost none of these left in New Brunswick. These are two of the only other ones. But what really regret is that there was one of these in Barker's Point in Fredericton up until about 20 years ago, O'Donnell's store, and they just, you know, the store stopped existing in the 90s, and they just ripped it down, and it should have been saved, but there aren't many. So in Upper Woodstock, this building, you know, it's a little tired, and it hasn't been even visited in many years, but it's right opposite the old courthouse in Upper Woodstock, building that was restored. And at one time, King's Landing, when they were talking about creating King's Landing, so it's where it is now because of obviously the head pond. At first, they came really close to making King's Landing here at Upper Woodstock because the community itself had so many historic buildings that are still there. So, I mean, this was actually one of them, is this commercial old tavern and store, and the inside still has all of its fittings as well. Now we're going to go up in time a little bit to Keswick Ridge School. Still a great school. I talked a bit about this one as well, but I'm going to talk specifically about the curve. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this building is most people wouldn't think anything remarkable about this school beyond the people and the teachers and the, you know, this wonderful institution. But that curvature, just simply the curvature of the front vestibule, is a deep connector. It's a very subtle, very low budget, very New Brunswick 1950s connection, but it means more than you would assume. And what it did is in the 1950s, remember, New Brunswick was usually, especially back then, about 20 years behind the times, right? So they were doing stuff here in the 50s, they're kind of doing elsewhere in the 30s and 60s, 40s, so on, and that's okay. But when you think of sort of curves in buildings, that hardly existed until sort of the Art Deco period. And with this curvature, it's their way of, there's no reason for them to do it beyond decoration, but it's an intention. It's an intention of something being sort of smooth and curved and designed. It's them injecting something of design that this building mattered. It mattered to not be just sort of square and cheap and as efficient as you could make it. And it connects it as much to these ideas of St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church in Red Deer. You think in 1968 by Douglas Cardinal that did the Canadian Museum of History in Ottawa. You think we have this great history in Canada of curved brick, and that brick itself, we think of solid, long, straight walls, but it's amazing, flexible, very sort of liquid and fluid material, which you can do these wonderful curves. Or you think of the curved corners of buildings like the Art Deco hotels in Miami. It was all about the curved corners. That's what it was. So the same sensibilities and intentions and sort of architectural devices that led them to put, and it's much more expressed and colorful. But, you know, it's Miami, this Keswick Ridge. What you have is kind of a Keswick Ridge version of this. And when you think about this, is what I'm hoping is not that this is, you know, is of the most architecturally important school in Canada. No, far from it. But that what really makes this remarkable is you think about that curve. It's not random. It was a really intentional design piece by the architects to do within the means in their budget of a very sort of tight New Brunswick education and construction department in the early 1950s to do something very worldly because this place served that, right? So that's the way to think about it, and that it matters. So Opus Craft Village. I was working with the Moores a bit last month. I just did a pretty significant article and research on Opus Craft Village for a National Decorative Arts magazine. And it's fascinating. I mean, I knew about it well as a kid, and I would have gone here as a kid, as I'm sure you all would have back in the day. So it opened from 1975 and ran till about like 1983. And this is something that came on with an explosion. I mean, Richard Hatfield was at the opening. Who was at the opening of Opus? Was anyone here at the opening? You guys were okay. And when it ended, it's unfortunate. Believe it or not, I actually couldn't find exactly when it ended because things sometimes end with a whimper. But it was, you know, it was open in 82, it wasn't open in 84, somewhere in 83. Things kind of slowly erode down. But it's an amazing collection of buildings beyond even socially, culturally, artistically. It was the first of its kind in Canada, this sort of artist collective. But the building itself was the symbol of fine craft for New Brunswick. And it was this tourism mecca by everyone from people in government. I mean, Hatfield came here all the time. But look at this building. It's really unique with the really steep roof, the multiple large windows. It doesn't look like typical buildings around here. And there it is in 1975. Probably remember that. And I gotta say, I love the the logo, which was designed by Marty Demain's wife. So you had right here, you had the ceramic studio and kiln. You had the glass shop there, which was an old salvage barn from somewhere in Maxquack Heights. And there's another older building behind. There's a house they moved, but none of this was here. This was just an open field up until 1974, 75. Then they built this. All these built on stilts as well. The artist built a lot of it. He said they worked with an architect. Marty couldn't remember who it was, but it was very much this community idea. And of course, speaking with the Moores, that they spoke about, you had these sort of kind of hippie artists coming to this place, but they lived here. They cared about the community. And it was a time when a lot of people, and academics and outsiders, were coming to Keswick Ridge, but because they shared the values of this place. And there was a lot of trust. It probably was a little bit tricky. What are these guys doing with their, it's probably smelling like marijuana and blowing glass? But they loved the community and they welcomed it all. And it was this wonderful place that was at the epicenter of New Brunswick's tourism and fine craft and visual arts in the 1970s, when tens of thousands of people would go to the Maxquack Craft Festival. So again, you create this little collection of buildings like the farms. You had the farm, the farmhouse, this sort of grouping of buildings. So it felt very familiar to the collections of buildings around Keswick Ridge. But what's really interesting, again, with board and batten, so the treatment of the siding was similar to the church. What's really important of the lineage of that building, especially the one to the right here, the ceramics, was, you can see where they're working. There's Alan Crimmins in the Great Kiln, and Marty Demain with his, supremely 1970s beard, making the glass. And we just got some of this work in the Beaverbrook Art Gallery collection as well. So Marty Demain's in that. But there's, forget some of the order of the slides. This is the inside of the shop, which was the upper building. I'm sure many of you remember going in there and buying things. And did you go in there a lot, Ivan, Nancy? Would you have gone in there back in the day?
Yeah.
Oh, you all did? Yeah. You remember just wondering where'd all my money go? And Nancy, these craft pieces. But my God, I would give anything to be able to go back into that shop now. Can you imagine? And so for this article, the Provincial Archives, which are just a treasure trove, as I'm sure some of you know, but they had these wonderful photographs. So from the article, you see the women looking through the windows, and this is time capsule. But again, 50 years ago, 1975 doesn't sound that long ago to me because I was born in 1970. So it's like, yeah, okay, but that's when you say it's half a century. These photos are all from then. It's outstanding, but they were nationally regarded as the only sort of craft collective of their kind. But what's neat about I want to tell you something about the building, and this is a big deal. There's a distinct reason why the Opus Craft Village and this building in particular, the one that was closest to the road, looked like this. And they used a model of one of the most famous arts buildings in the United States, which is, it still exists today, which is revered. It's called Haystack Mountain School of Crafts in Maine in 1961. Has anyone ever heard of Haystack before? No? Haystack still exists in, it's in coastal Maine, about halfway between Bangor and Portland, right on the coast. In 1961, it was designed by a guy named Edward Larrabee Barnes, who's one of the great post-war modern architects in the United States. This is a National Historic Site for the States. I think there's only 25 buildings in the United States post-war, 25 that are modern, that are declared have this national level of protection, and this is one of them. And it's still this working school of arts and crafts. You know, it's a really big deal. And what they did was, this is the drawing. That's the cliff going into the Atlantic Ocean. They did a series of shed roof shingled buildings, kind of running up, connected with boardwalks in between. So at a time when a lot of architecture in the States was very kind of cold, it was glass and steel and international style and concrete started coming. This was about shingles. It was about simple shed roofs, almost like farm buildings. It was almost their building. They were using the sensibilities of your barn to build these and to collect in, because it was all about the hand. It was a reaction against modernity in the post-war. And look at this. I mean, it was beautiful pieces built on a hill with post structures, not built up land with wooden shingles. Well, look at that. That's Haystack, one of the most important post-war collections of buildings in America. Oh, and oh, there we go. And there you got Opus. You see the post below, steep, simple shed roofs, and that's what they were basing it on. Or Marty Domain was American, and the other two, no, they were Canadian. Bill Norman, but I mean, they would have known about Haystack. I'm sure they visited. So this was meant to be Canada's Haystack. Okay, so it's part of it. So just a couple little things I remember. I don't know if I showed this one last time, but Mactaquac Heights house, when I was driving, relatively standard house on the front, but on the side, I see these incredible, huge semicircular windows. Now, I know the intention for this was not to evoke the next architect I'm going to show you, but it exists. One of the greatest architects of the 20th century is this gentleman named Louis Khan. And this is Bangladesh's parliament, which is, you can see, you know, the semicircular window. So he used this sort of motif often. So Louis Kahn, basically, I'm sure you've all heard of Frank Lloyd Wright. There's Frank Lloyd Wright, right below him is Louis Kahn. They're sort of the second greatest American ever architect. And so this was his sort of motif of this. He also did, this is in the brick building at the top was the Indian School of Management in Islamabad, India. And the black and white photo is an art center in Fort Worth in Texas. But look at this, you get that sort of repeated element of the sort of half circles. And so that was something which he saw, is this idea, they're very human, like sort of eyebrows, they look like eyes, right? Rather than just squares, which are not natural. But this is like, they give the building a humanity, humanism, and a character. And so going back to this as well, like, it's not meant to evoke Louis Kahn, but it does. And so it's a remarkable thing. And there's, trust me, there's no house that looks like this in New Brunswick. So it's wonderful. Jen Pazienza's art studio, you see, and I know Jen couldn't be here today with Jerry, but living next to the old farmhouse from 200 years ago, they built this in the mid 2000s. And again, with sort of the vernacular sensibility of a shed roof, but with the modernity and this contemporariness comes with these huge sort of glass windows overlooking, again, as you know, the most beautiful view in York County here, overlooking the river and so on. And it's this idea that you can still honor the past and really speak to the present with these sort of wonderful buildings. And the space inside, it's huge, it's big, it's open truss, open cathedral ceiling. And it's a great, like, this is an important building in Keswick Ridge. I remember I showed this a bit last time, is this random thing of Keswick Ridge, Keswick River Farms, but as a collection of agricultural buildings is stunning. I mean, there's nothing so much you'd say that are, you could say sort of maybe out of the ordinary, but as a group and for the scale and color and sense of materials are things that attract global architects of things with deep meaning. So these are some of the, the older barn, some of the ones, the post barns and so on. I mean, they're just compositionally astounding, and how these things sort of work, the reds and the different, like you got like 5 different textures of siding. It's absolutely outstanding. And there's a lot of important architects today, like Glenn Murcutt in Australia, and Brian McKay Lyons here in Canada. Both of them are some of the most famous and revered architects in the world. The idea of using corrugated steel in these sort of kind of barn influenced buildings, they realize that there's a real beauty to that, sort of in the common industrial form. They would come, let's put it this way. So Glenn Murcutt won is basically the Nobel Prize of Architecture, as Austria. It's called the Pritzker Prize. He won it about 10 years ago. And if he came, he would love it here. He would think the houses are really cool, but he would say, no, I'm gonna spend time right here because those inspire him, the outback of Australia. But again, this collection of buildings. Keswick Ridge Apple Co-op. Let me ask you this, Russ. Would this building make your book?
It wouldn't the one that they're doing what we're planning right now, because it didn't make that book.
Well, it
We haven't
should.
been thinking about
It should. And I'm telling you, I'm gonna even get on my list. Don't let it stop you. Make this bigger and better. It needs to matter more. Okay? Because you have this. This exists. If you just do it again, it's like, well, okay, it's improved. But you got some things that really matter. The Keswick Ridge Apple Co-op, corrugated steel. I'll help you. I'll help you. No, absolutely. Part of it is because it does matter. So I remember driving by this as a kid a lot, and the fact is still is it actually used now as Apple, or is it just a warehouse now, or is it still used as
storing boats. Mainline.
okay, so it's storage now. Okay, well, okay, that's all right. But when it was built in 1964, here's an article from the Gleaner in 1984. Just read, you can see all the different groups that are out of there saying every success to Keswick Ridge, the word modern. Now it was added to, so the original one is, right, it's hard to see there, but much more simple. But the article talks about deeply reverential terms about the technology of keeping the apples fresh here with air and oxygen management and all those kinds of things, and about using, the kind of clean materials, plywood inside, corrugated metal outside, but really sort of advanced. This was deep advanced technology for the area at the time, and really celebrated, as this kind of social cooperative. Also, this whole place coming together to build this, right? And one of the neat things about that is some people might think, that's ugly, that's plain. That's not ugly at all. I think it's gorgeous, because if you look at some of the contemporary architects, so just picture this in your mind, keep that, 1964. Look at this. University of Iowa Visual Arts Building by Stephen Hall was one of the greatest architects in America, 2016. This sort of volumetric thing, sort of cubes with corrugated steel. This great contemporary architecture today. How about this building? Simode Research and Development Center in France for a lighting company, 2019. Square, like that's almost exactly the same facade as the original Apple Co-op. So one of the things I think to think about is that there's ways of kind of framing like materials and that kind of thing, which maybe are out of our expectation of what great buildings are. But in other places of the world, they say that is great design. And remember, that also was like a factory, it was an industrial building. So it wasn't meant to look kind of cute and decorated, but it was sophisticated, it was efficient, and it was beautifully done. So that building connects with some really important buildings in France and in the United States. Trust me, Stephen Hall, who's he's like the Mario Lemieux of architecture in the States. If he came here, he'd go to that Apple Co-op and go, you guys have an absolute gem. So and also with the history of the farmers, there's things that really matter. One of the last ones, the dam. Whether you love it or hate it, or the fact that it's going to cost us $2 billion to fix. And you know why? That's because they used the wrong aggregate. It was probably like a $50 choice cost anyway. But what are you going to do? This was, I took this shot at night. I came down one time, and it's amazing is if you want to take a photo of something, there's a gate. Someone's like, no, you can't come in here. Just tell me you're an architect. They'll let you in. And I come through it honestly, but even though I'm not really doing it anymore, and they say, oh, well, yeah, no one's gonna lie about that. Sure, go take a picture. And because it was great at night, it was heroic. But people forget about the gargantuan size of Mactaquac. Like, look at this. Those, like, those are windows the size of this, right? Like of the kind of places to walk in there. I mean, this mammoth piece of concrete infrastructure from the 60s to the 70s. And this is architecture. Now, whether you love it or you hate it, it exists. It's going to be there for a long time. But it was about rural electrification. It was about the idea of progress for industry and the economy of New Brunswick. Yeah, there's definitely issues, as any dam would be. But one of the things is to think about is when especially after I took this photograph, I thought, wow, there's some pretty bold, heroic stuff going on here. You think about it connects it with the Tennessee Valley Authority dams, the late 1930s, which was one of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's biggest New Deal plans about getting America out of the Depression. He built in the Tennessee Valley about 30 dams and hydroelectric, which were beautifully designed. They saw in the repetition of these concrete forms this idea of this kind of heroic idea of humankind kind of harnessing nature and bringing us out of poverty. So we see it very differently now because we're looking at the cost more, but it's still they weren't just built, they were actually quite beautiful. And you see FDR, they have this kind of Art Deco sensibility of something that was quite sculptural. And I know, looking at old newspaper articles, when the Mactaquac Dam opened, they had a lot of tours, public tours or visitor centers. It was a big deal to go and see this thing. So again, it's an important piece of architecture in the community. Love it or hate it, it's there and will always be there. So I'm just thinking that what you have here, you think of the lineage of all of this collection of architecture you have here, is astounding for a community of this size. So yeah, there you go. That's what it is. So I love everything. Are you on time? Good. All right. Absolutely, yeah. Yes. Yes, Shirley's friend. Okay.
The Anglican Church seems to be identical to the Anglican Church in Gagetown, the village Gage.
They're quite similar in scale. It's I know the one you mean. It's relative because that one has the kind of the tower on the side, but in scale they're really similar. And the Anglicans were really big on steep roofs because in these rural areas where you couldn't get sort of the stone buildings with the real sort of Gothic arch, what they would often do is at least have as steep a roof as they could to kind of imply that verticality of the Gothic, right? But it's if you ever get a chance to go to the one in New Maryland, like in the summer, they'll have it open more. The one in Maryland is astounding because it's got a lot of sort of darker wood, and it's but again, the same architect. He did some really beautiful churches. Yeah. Yeah, his question. Yes.
The haystack
Yeah,
in Maine?
in Maine. Yeah.
Is that near Blue Hill?
Oh, geez. You know what? Blue Hill. I think
In that area.
yeah, I think it is. I think it is.
There's a
And
lot of artists and
yeah. Yeah, and then a lot of people from New York and Boston would
Yeah.
come up because they would often go to Maine. I mean, Bar Harbor and Maine
Yeah.
would be where they would kind of typically go, which is why they built it. Maine was always seen as that, they have vacation land on their license plates, but that's not exaggeration. That was always America would kind of get away, and they built it there. But again, that was 60 years ago, and it's still vibrant and yeah, still working.
that time, people that came over, a lot of them were related to Vietnam and getting away from Nebraska.
Yeah, they were. Marty Domain was, because he was American. That's why he first went to Miramichi for a year and then came here, but he absolutely was. And there's some other, who else? Oh, the Murphys. Yeah, you mentioned that. That's right. Now, I spoke to Don Pell about that. He was Canadian, but he was telling me about, a lot of American artists would come. Like, if you're an artist, it's like, you get out of Dodge, you come here. And then you get a place like that attracted them. Yeah. That's right.
Draft dodger leather bags, they sell at the, that's what they call them. They're
Oh.
square leather bags, they sell at the market.
Oh, they call draft dodger bags? Maybe that's like the one you have. Put everything in quick and go. Exactly.
Oh, he was, yes, those square bags, they call them the draft dodger.
Yeah, well, when I'd heard is that he'd actually served in Vietnam and maybe said, I'm gonna tour, I got to get out of here. But yeah, well, geez, I mean, you worked with my mother at Wassess Road, and there were some Americans that came up through there and going to UNB, and yeah, I mean, they came here, and find some sort of bucolic rural paradise in Keswick Ridge. So yeah, absolutely. So again, it's connected also with the deep social history of Canada. And we're kind of going into that now, a place that welcomes people and yeah, that the architecture is part of that. Yeah.
John, one of the things that I'm struck by is in your presentation of buildings that many of us are very familiar with and have loved for a long, long time. But the way you, the way you talk about them has created sort of a different feeling. For me, at least, I don't know with the rest of you, but it's a more spiritual feeling that how valuable and what those buildings in our area that we love mean to us. And
Okay. Oh, thank
for
you.
that, because it has altered something that is wooden structures into something that in fact has feeling.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I appreciate that. But that actually is what, and I do genuinely feel that the idea that, well, Dave, when we're walking through the barn, I mean, I didn't say it's like St. Peter's Cathedral, but there's something reverential and beyond beautiful, the light coming in and shining. And I remember this when you came up too, and it's like, what are you doing here? And we talked about it, about the journey. You can feel the human hands. You can feel the dedication and the sacrifice of people. And that is getting kind of metaphysical or that, but it's real. It's real. It's all there. Exactly. I mean, the same as when you have, when you showed me the leather bag that was made at Opus. Well, God, just the fact that you've held that thing thousands of times and use it develops a meaning. It's a part of you as much as it's a part of them. So the buildings, it's like that. They reflect the community. The buildings reflect us. We build them. They then reflect us. And I think there's something really special about Keswick Ridge. I'm not blowing smoke up you as well. The fact that this stayed and the fact that you saved the store is there's a deep sense of community, which you were saying was really here in the 70s from this fusion of locals and those from away. And you have a deep love of place and it's expressed through the architecture. So yeah, it's there. Yeah, great. Kathy, we grew up just down the street from each other. Yeah.
To say, I wonder if that would, if we're talking about the Keswick Ridge School and the curved brick was there. I wonder if that was planned, like if the designer did that, or if the craftsperson who was laying that brick just said, I can't just do another square.
Oh, square, yeah.
Awful.
Well, it's good. Yeah, it's good. But the architects designed it. The architects designed, yeah, but they didn't do it for every building. So I'm saying even the idea that there's that Keswick Ridge. No, they said you deserve a little bit of design. You deserve a little bit of local fun. It is, yeah. It shows that to them the community matters a bit more. Yeah, good. Yeah.
I heard a rumor a while back that there was, I think it was a small graveyard, maybe black people were buried there in someone's backyard in the. Where?
Here in Apple Lane.
In Apple Lane?
Yeah, there's a lot of O'Rees, like Willie O'Ree. So
That come up in the conversation.
yeah,
So is
Yeah.
that, is it a private property or is it an actual?
it's a real you well you kind of walk next to a house.
Can people go in and just walk?
It's worth going and he'll tell you how to get there, but it's yeah. And I went with Tim just 2 years ago. He was doing a run and what's remarkable about it is they're black families, but the gravestones are really actually quite decorated and lovely and they're in really good shape. So, and it's not that the blacks who lived here, they were kind of cast out of Fredericton,
Were
but
they residents here at that time?
yeah, and on the other side of the river too, there's a lot of significant black community, but they're beautifully quite remarkable gravestones.
There's another one in the mouth of Keswick. So where
Yeah, you know what actually, well, was worth, you should sometime in activity have a visit to that graveyard because it's beautiful. There's maybe, I don't know, a dozen stones or something, but yeah, it's really neat.
They couldn't see you at home.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but again, it's, oh, yeah.
Tony, is that? Be looked after, or is it anyone on it, or just?
Someone owns, I know it's for sale now, and I went looking at it, the building, the one that I kind of focused on more is in okay shape. But the other one is kind of falling down a little bit because any wooden building, if you don't look after it for 30 years, they just start to go. But there's value in them. I hope someone someday resuscitates them.
Several years ago, we had a yard share, they was digging them.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, no, they just haven't really been looked after. Yeah, but I'm sure they're salvageable, but you know, in 5 years, it might not be that way. Yeah.
And do you know if sign still exists?
I don't know. It doesn't, it's not out there now. I'm sure it was taken down and it may be under one of the buildings or stuck in the
No,
back.
I mean, somebody just took it.
Someone probably just,
Oh,
probably just took it. Well, and by the way, one of the neat design things, if you remember the logo, it's sort of like an eight-pointed snowflake. Each of the ends of those are Greek symbols for craft. Tin, clay, glass, like that. It's pretty high stuff. Yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna use this opportunity to ask anybody in this group, if they know of anybody that's into repairs of antique furniture, or any contact.
No, there you go. So yeah, I'm sure, you know, just you go on Google. I'm sure there's people around town that do. So as I said, look, thank you so much. Again, I love this community. I've been coming up here for years with friends and so on. But like, look, and again, this is a great book. It is. And by all means, look, it's your community. You do as you wish with this. But all I would say is I would encourage you to think that you can make a publication, madam, and when things are in print, that's kind of it forever. This is what other people will see. And I just encourage you to think that you can add to this that makes the architecture matter more. Because sometimes the things, you're more than just the old houses. You know, the houses are where the people that ran the community and lived here, but the other things are equally interesting, you know, and even running into the 20th century too, because guess what? 20th century is last century. Yeah, big deal. 100%. Oh yeah. Some people look when you need to go, the outhouse is the most important building in the world. You know? So yeah, no, I would say so for sure. Anyway, thanks very much, and I'll stick around for